Okay, well, according to my watch, it's 11 o'clock, and now that I've officially logged onto the webinar under my name, one less editing issue I need to take care of, but I want to welcome everyone. We've had a lot of RSVPs for our Anchorage Chamber of Commerce virtual Make It Monday forum. My name's Bruce Bustamante. I'm the president and CEO of the Anchorage Chamber, and also joining us on the call will be Tasha Swan, who works with the Chamber, Kaylin Smith, and Tabitha Karpow from our staff. And of course, we're very pleased to be able to work with Jon Bittner with Alaska Small Business Development Center, and Noland Klouda, who is with the University of Alaska Center for Economic Development. More elaborate introductions will come later. We've had the pleasure of working with both of these gentlemen as we both serve on the Mayor's Economic Resiliency Task Force. And I know that Jon and Nolan both work on the State Policy Committee with me, and Jon is also on the Business Tools and Policy Committee along with the Federal Committee, I believe. And Nolan, you also serve on the Federal Committee as well. But I mean, it really gained a lot of knowledge from these two gentlemen, and I'm really happy they're here to share what's happening with their particular organizations as it relates to small business. And so with that, I'd like to start with the introductions. Oh, also I want to make a point to share that even though it is a virtual Make It Monday forum, we do want to thank our sponsor, our quarterly Make It Monday sponsor, and that's Alaska 529, a great investment in the university system for education. So again, thank you to Tito and our friends at Alaska 529. Okay, first I'd like to introduce Jon Bittner. He's the Executive Director of the Alaska Small Business Development Center, and he oversees 7 regional centers to ensure that Alaska's small business development provides accessible, high-quality business assistance services to individuals and existing businesses. In his role, he provides a program management, advocacy, and fundraising, in addition to serving as the lead investigator for various grant programs that are run through the Alaska Small Business Development Center. He formerly served as Vice President of the Anchorage Economic Development Corporation. Jon also served as Deputy Commissioner for the Alaska Department of Commerce, Community and Economic Development. As Executive Director, Noland Klouda provides overall leadership for the University of Alaska Center for Economic Development, as well as support for other programs of the UAA Business Enterprise Institute. He is a certified economic developer through the International Economic Development Council and currently serves as chair of the Municipality of Anchorage Budget Advisory Commission. Nolan was named to Alaska's top 40 under 40 in 2015. He holds a Master's degree in Public Administration from the University of Kansas and a Bachelor of Arts in History and Political Science from Gustavus Adolphus College. So gentlemen, welcome. Thank you so much for working with the Anchorage Chamber for our virtual Make It Monday forum, our maiden voyage here. So it's a lot of responsibility on your shoulders. So as I understand, Nolan, you're going to go first?
Yes, that's correct. All right, I am going to attempt to share my screen here. So hopefully folks are going to be able to see what I've got going. So thanks a bunch, Bruce, for this opportunity, and to Jon and the team at the Small Business Development Center and the Anchorage Chamber for putting this together. I wanted to offer you guys some commentary on how the economy is dealing with COVID-19 and what we know about it, what we think might be happening down the road, what some responses are, and see if we can shed some light on this topic. You know, COVID-19 is really a kind of an unprecedented crisis. I think you have to go back over a century to the Spanish flu to look at something that's comparable that's happened in the world when we were a completely different type of global economy than we are now. And in many ways, it's hard to draw a lot of examples from that. You know, when we're talking about Alaska specifically, you know, this is really coming to us at a tough time and really constituting what I think is in some ways kind of a perfect storm of events when you see that we've just come out of about a 3-year recession, you know, that we saw very, very kind of tepid, slow growth in 2019 after a period of losing a lot of jobs in our state and of seeing a lot of out-migration happen. certainly not a fun thing to see these little green shoots of recovery happening in a very fragile way, I think, and then suddenly to get cratered by this type of an event, by this virus. COVID-19 is different from anything that we've dealt with recently at the state level, at the global level, at the national level. I think that the closest metaphor that I can think of for this event is that it's almost as if there's a slow motion earthquake or hurricane hitting the whole country at once. It's as if it's not like a typical natural disaster that strikes one region really severely for one point in time. This is something that's causing damage across the planet all at once, and it unfolding over a period of weeks and months. That makes this, materially pretty different. This is also happening when oil prices are pretty depressed. Oil has recently been trading as low as $20 a barrel, or in the vicinity of $20 a barrel for North Slope oil. So that may be subsiding. I think that there's some agreement on ending the price war between Russia and Saudi Arabia, but it's still a really precarious time. So what we know at the national level, at least, and I think that this is probably going to be pretty comparable in Alaska, is that about 1 in 4 businesses are temporarily shuttered. A quarter of businesses, another 30% of businesses think that they're about to close within 2 weeks. Again, we're talking about temporary closures in response to the recovery here. Between the two of those, that's over half of small businesses in the US that are either closed or that are right about to close as a result of this outbreak. And that's a pretty jarring number. But what's more concerning to me is not just what's happening in the near term as a shock to the economy, but what might happen as a result of it that endures for longer. And so almost half, if you look at 43% of those same businesses say that they could permanently close their doors within 6 months. And that's where we get into some real concerns and real problems. There's both a short-term effect to this and a long-term one. And I think that understanding the interplay between those is really important. So what's happened in Alaska is a series of these weekly unemployment claims releases that if you're not queasy by these, then you probably have a stronger stomach than I do. A usual week in Alaska, we have around 800 or 1,000 unemployment claims. This is kind of part of the normal part of the economy functioning, adding jobs, subtracting jobs. So when suddenly you get over 7,000 one week, and then the next week you double that, and then you get a similar number to that last week, the next week, you end up with about 36,000 jobs that we've lost in Alaska just in about the last 3 weeks. 36,000 jobs is around 10% of the total employment in Alaska. That's a pretty big, scary number. Official unemployment rates usually take about 2 months to calculate. So if we took our most recent rate of around 6% unemployment, we added this on top of it, we're looking at 15 or 16% unemployment in Alaska right now, which is it's an astronomical number. It's much higher than we've seen anytime recently, and especially how quickly this unemployment materialized. It exceeds anything that we've seen in any kind of recorded history that we have in the US, outside of a few maybe localized examples. Even unemployment before and after Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans was not quite as dramatic as we've seen recently, both Alaska and nationally. I think that's pretty jarring. Which types of sectors have been hit? I think a lot of folks on this call are probably representing some of the businesses that are in the affected industries, but this is what the Alaska Department of Labor put together as the most vulnerable sectors in terms of employment. If you look at April 2019, using that as an example, all of these added up are around 90,000 jobs. Many businesses in these fields won't be affected. And our retail, our grocery stores, I think are hiring, seeing a really strong business as people are buying and stocking up, and in some cases panic buying. We know that our restaurants and our bars are obviously not doing terribly well. We know that anything tied to tourism and air transportation, especially passenger transportation, is doing very poorly as well. So altogether, these represent about 90,000 jobs in Alaska, and there are other sectors not listed here that are also vulnerable. We saw that the North Slope is shutting down a lot of oil and gas operations, or especially exploration. So we know that job losses are still piling up and are of a pretty severe nature. But I'm going to suggest that maybe the numbers that we see are not as terrible as they seem at first glance, because what we're talking about is the immediate response to an external shock. When unemployment climbs after a financial crisis like in 2008, or like the stock market collapse in 1929 that caused the Great Depression, that's a lot more difficult to deal with than unemployment that's the result of a shorter term duration in some ways, because this unemployment doesn't reflect a structural weakness in the economy. It reflects this external type of an event that might be very uncertain in its effects and its duration, but that ultimately will end, and most of that unemployment will prove to be temporary. But that said, there are enormous hazards here, because the longer the shutdowns last for businesses, the more of them do shutter their doors, on a more permanent basis, the more workers are out of work on a longer term basis, and that creates obviously some severe problems. So household spending, if we come out of a crisis and households aren't able to spend enough money, then that's going to result in more economic contraction that might be of a longer term duration. And so the policy challenge right now is in some ways to have this coma be something of a medically induced coma, is an analogy that's out there, to keep workers and to keep businesses on some kind of life support, so that when the virus threat subsides, then the economy is able to, hopefully, resume something like its normal operations. But we do know that there is going to be some damage, and we don't know how severe that damage is. With that type of spirit, the CARES Act was passed just a couple of weeks ago. This was the 2.2 trillion in stimulus spending. When I looked at this, I thought that it contained a lot of the right stuff. I thought that the conceptual design of it was mostly good. That relief for households, the direct payments to households, the unemployment benefits being expanded upon, and also especially the small business lending. I thought that the design of it was pretty well on point. I think that the keeping the households able to sustain themselves, even when many of them are unemployed, I think is going to be really important. Households not going into debt, not going into foreclosure. That's very important to the economy at large, as well as to the individuals affected. The small business lending, I think that most of the small business help is coming in the form of two programs: the Paycheck Protection Program and the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. Those programs seemed designed well. The problem, though, is the implementation and the speediness of getting resources out to businesses, and also whether there was enough resource really put into that. The Paycheck Protection Program is the one that offers forgivable loans that go through the banking system. I've seen that there's been a lot of difficulty accessing those, and also that the money is going pretty quickly too. Even though many businesses haven't gotten their individual money, it's taking a long time for that. But the obligations of it, John probably has a more updated number, but as of the weekend, I saw that about $180 billion of the $350 billion was already obligated to businesses, and that's only 10 days after the program opened its applications. So that money's going fast. The other loan program that works directly through the Small Business Administration, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, has seen, I saw a number, 380 billion in applications received, and there's only a $17 billion pot of money. So there's literally $20 worth of loan asks for every dollar that the program has. So the way that money will be rationed out, or simply await Congress to put more money into either of those, is really a big question. And it speaks to the enormity of the problem. I would have thought that 350 billion for that Paycheck Protection Program was enough money. I would have thought that was adequate, but it is apparently not. And so these are some of the challenges that many of you are dealing with today, why there's so much frustration. In some ways, the federal systems that are in place to distribute money are just not built for the level of volume that's needing to be put through them right now. It's as if we're trying to put out a structure fire, with a garden hose. It's not that there isn't just enough water. It's just that the hose isn't meant to put out the volume of water that's needed to put the fire out at this point. And so that seems to be where we are at the moment. And if we started to look at how the next several months play out, this slide is maybe a bit tough to read, but what the big outlines of it, nobody no one wants to be bold enough to hang their reputation on specific predictions, but I think that there's some really important insights in this as far as what lies ahead for businesses in our local economy. And I think that according to this projection, and and I think it's actually Morgan Chase, there's a public health expert, Matthew Harrison, that has been trying to forecast some of this work. That probably COVID-19 infections aren't going to quite peak out until into May. We're going to see different peaks at different times in the U.S., and that probably we might see some of the shutdowns easing up, and some easing of the social distancing happening into the summer, which is certainly good. We're going to develop a lot more testing capacity really fast. That should be good. Medical supplies don't become fully available to reach the capacity level we need until about June. And then we also have to prepare for the possibility of second wave infections or third wave infections, which will probably be smaller than the first wave, but are likely to occur and likely to come with some level of shutdowns. And so when we look out to the next year plus, we see that we have to be vigilant about the threat of additional breakouts occurring, which could mean a period of the restrictions easing on social distancing and some businesses being able to open, and then having to close them down again or impose additional restrictions, and then having certain cycles of that occur as the months go by. I think that for business owners right now, it's probably really important to plan for those future shutdowns to happen again until we know for sure, and also that there will probably be, even when the economy does open up, that there will probably be some other restrictions about very crowded spaces. We can't necessarily fill arenas for concerts or sporting events anymore. We have to be careful about how our transportation systems work, about how commercial flights would work. So these are all some of the things that we're going to have to be thinking about as we go forward. As a vaccine becomes available, that will ease a lot of concerns. If other antiviral treatments become available, that'll ease some economic pressure as well. But it's very difficult to say exactly what the future holds. But you can think about this whole period as something we have to get through with our sort of life support systems for the economy, as we're in this kind of comatose type of state, economically speaking. There's this question about, what do economists say about whether this is necessary? We're inflicting damage on the economy, not just through mandatory closures, but through the public health advice that's being given, and which I think is very necessary advice. And so the question comes up: is it worth it for the economy, right? Is it worth the amount of pain and anguish that we're going through? Well, I think that here's what economists say, that tolerating that, these are professional economists. This was a poll that was done, that this level of shutdown is probably necessary, even according to economists, in order to prevent the disease from doing its worst possible damage. There's very strong agreement in the economics profession about that, even though the pain is very, very tangible for so many workers and for so many businesses and for so many nonprofits and employers in the broader economy. So there is probably also going to be another stimulus package along the way. This has been talked about a lot recently, and I believe that last week Mitch McConnell in the Senate said it was necessary to do one. I don't know that we're going to have quite the bipartisan agreement that we had with the last package, and even though there was fighting about it, all told, by Congress standards, they got that $2.2 trillion done pretty fast. There are some areas of broad agreement, though, between congressional Democrats and congressional Republicans. One is that there's putting about $250 billion more into that Paycheck Protection Program to offer those forgivable loans to businesses. There does seem to be agreement about that, which is good. There's also agreement about probably about some assistance to the healthcare system itself. There's talk about what might be in it for the Postal Service, which is really critical in rural Alaska, where bypass mail moves most of the consumer goods and freight. That would be an important consideration as well. We've seen some pretty radical calls for more help for businesses. Josh Hawley, who's a Republican senator from Missouri, wrote an op-ed last week calling for the federal government to essentially fund all employer organizations in the U.S. up to 80% of their median worker payroll, to basically pay businesses to keep workers on track and to offer bonuses to employers that hire laid off workers. And that's a pretty radical thing, especially for a small government conservative to recommend. But I think that the times we're in people are looking for stronger action in at least some circles to solve this problem. So probably some level of stimulus will be coming in addition to what we've seen. With that, I'm gonna hand things back over to Jon Bittner, and then I think we'll have some Q&A after that. So.
Yeah, thank you, Nolan. For those of you who are watching, I wanted to mention that there is a questions section on the side of your screen. You should be able to see where you can add questions that you'd like Nolan and I to answer after my presentation. I'll be going through them, trying to consolidate them if there's duplicates, things along those lines, but I highly encourage you to, if you have any questions during the presentation, go ahead and drop them in there. I was going to talk a little bit. My name is Jon Bittner with the Small Business Development Center. I was going to talk a little bit about the SBA programs that are out there, as well as a few other initiatives and resources for businesses, some trends, and what we think is coming down the pipe. Before that, though, I really wanted to take a minute and just thank the Anchorage Chamber. Bruce and his team have done a phenomenal job of providing information and support to small businesses and their members. I know that the e-newsletters that they put out are some of the best in terms of the quality and the timeliness of the information. And I really appreciate them giving us a chance to talk to you here today. What we're finding is, at the SBDC, what we're finding is that one of the best things that we can do, that anyone can do, is make sure that not only are you providing information as it changes in this sort of rapidly evolving time, but to make sure that the information you're getting is good information. I believe that it would be better to say nothing than to provide information that may not be accurate in this current situation, because people are so desperately in need of assistance, and there's so many different opinions out there. So I really appreciate the Anchorage Chamber being one of those trusted sources of intel, and I know that Bruce and his team do a phenomenal job of making sure that what they put out is the latest and greatest that there is. For those businesses out there that are interested, and I'm sure many of you have heard of these programs before, but I just want to always drive home what's available. The sort of 4 major flavors of SBA disaster assistance that are out there right now are the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, and this is sort of the SBA's traditional loan program that they deploy whenever there's a natural disaster. This was actually the mechanism they used after the earthquake here about 1.5 years ago, 2 years ago, to help businesses that were negatively impacted. What's interesting about this is that it's also available to nonprofits. So if you're a 501c3, a veterans organization, or a religious institution, you can also apply for these funds. Small businesses, self-employed individuals, independent contractors, sole proprietors, and tribal business concerns are also, among a few other categories, are also eligible. The terms are fairly good. It's a 30-year loan, up to a 30-year loan, up to $2 million per loan, and the rate for small businesses is 3.75%, and for nonprofits is 2.75%. Anything up to $200,000 doesn't require a personal guarantee, and anything up to $25,000 doesn't require collateral. If you don't have collateral and you're looking for a loan over $25,000, that's still okay. But if you do have something to collateralize, the SBA usually is interested in making that happen. An additional part of this that a lot of people are excited about is their EIDL advance, loan advance. And that is up to $10,000 as what they're calling a loan advance. It's really more of a grant. And it's based on the number of employees that you have. So when you fill out an EIDL loan application, there's a section of that application that asks if you would like to also receive one of these advances. Let's say you have 5 employees in your business, you would be eligible for up to $5,000. The advances are supposed to go out within 3 days of a successful application. The massive volume of applicants has pushed that timeline back a bit. but we've heard that this week they are going through the backlog and really getting those dollars, aggressively getting those dollars into people's bank accounts. This is the quickest and easiest funding that you can get through the CARES Act for your business that does not have to be repaid. So if you are eligible, I highly recommend that folks get in the queue to apply for this, as well as, if it fits your business, an economic injury disaster loan. The other programs that are out there, Nolan mentioned the Paycheck Protection Program. This is another program. This is a newer one that was sort of created through the CARES Act based on something that the SBA had rolled out a while back. This again is for self-employed individuals, independent contractors, sole proprietors, and small businesses, as well as 501c3s and veterans organizations. There's a few other businesses that are eligible, and they also have waivers for small businesses in the hotel and food services industries, franchisees, and similar concerns. The sole proprietors, self-employed individuals, and gig workers, they were only recently accepted into the program. I believe it was last Friday. And the difference, another main difference between this program and the EIDL, the EIDL is a loan directly from the federal government. It doesn't involve private sector lenders. The PPP is done through SBA certified lenders, banks or credit unions. The terms are a little more interesting, a little more complicated than the EIDL. For one thing, the maximum amount that you are eligible for under this program is 250% of your average monthly payroll from the past year. You can actually go back to 2019 if you are in a seasonal industry, and it's up to a maximum of $10 million. Employees that make over $100,000, anything over 100 can't be applied. What's, I think, gotten people excited about this particular program is in the 8 weeks after you receive it, if you spend money on payroll, at least 75% of the overall amount on payroll and the rest on rent, utilities, mortgage interest, similar eligible criteria, then all of those dollars are actually forgiven from the loan you got, up to 100% of the loan. So if you spend the money correctly within the time frame allotted, you can actually get 100% of this loan forgiven. The other loan programs or programs that are out there, one is called the SBA Express Bridge Loan, and this is for any business in operation before March 13th, 2020, which has fewer than 500 employees, or if you meet the SBA's size standards, which is based on your NAICS code and revenue. These are also through SBA certified banks and credit unions, and you need to have an existing relationship with that lending entity as of March 13th, 2020. This is a maximum of 7 years, and it's up to $25,000. The terms are a little different than the PPP and the EIDL. These are meant to be more exactly what they're called, bridge loans, to get you through the short term until these other funds may come online. Then last but not least, the SBA Small Business Debt Relief Program is for people that have existing SBA 7A loans, 504 loans, and microloans. And I should qualify 7A loans that weren't made under the Paycheck Protection Program, because those are also considered 7A. But if you have any other type of 7A loan, 504 loan, or a microloan, you actually get automatic debt relief where the SBA covers all loan payments, including principal, interest, and fees for the next 6 months. This happens automatically. You don't have to apply or do anything on your part. It'll just happen. So I feel I should address Nolan's the statements Nolan made about the funding for these programs. He's right. The PPP did burn through about $180 billion so far, and that was largely before one of the largest small business lenders in the nation, Wells Fargo, was allowed to bypass the asset cap that they had run into early on, which prevented them from participating. So I anticipate that the rate of successful loan applications is going to go up fairly dramatically. The EIDL, I've heard similar statements about the number of applications versus the amount of funding. What I can say to this is the CARES Act, which was the sort of the authorizing relief bill that Congress passed a few weeks ago, was one of the largest relief bills that Congress has ever passed in peacetime. It was a huge effort on behalf of the House and the Senate to try and find the best ways to deploy capital to the small businesses and the individuals that needed it. They did the best they could in a very, very, politically speaking, short period of time. I believe that I'm a little more optimistic on the next round of funding. I believe that as these programs are starting to become strapped for funds, Congress will overcome any politics involved with passing another round, at least to recapitalize these programs and other programs within the CARES Act that are probably going to face the similar issues. What the time frame on that is difficult to say, but I have to believe that they understand that their constituents are going to hurt, and it's going to hurt across the entire nation. There's no one political spectrum or one region. This is a nationwide issue that needs to be addressed quickly. And everything we've heard from the congressional delegation here in Alaska, Senator Murkowski, Senator Sullivan, and Representative Young, leads us to believe that they are confident that something will be passed in the near future. I know that a lot of folks out there are concerned about the rollout of these programs as well. Here's what I can tell you. I mean, I completely understand. I've heard from businesses all over the state about how difficult this is for them. You know, being closed down, having no access to customers, limited access to customers, a lot of uncertainty about when this is all going to end and people are going to be able to go out and shop again. The difficulty that we've run into is that what we're going through, and Nolan covered this extremely well, is unprecedented in, I believe, living memory, honestly. I don't think anybody ever anticipated that the systems that are being relied upon to provide these services, these funds, this assistance, would ever have to deal with the magnitude that they're dealing with today. If you look at the SBA programs, like I mentioned, the EIDL, it's an existing program, so it makes sense for that to be used as a mechanism to deploy capital. It was never really designed to handle every small business in the nation needing those funds at the same time. So I think that, you know, what they've been able to accomplish, they were given a fairly impossible task, and what they've been able to accomplish so far has been impressive. And I know that's not helpful to businesses that have not received their funds yet, and it's small comfort. But I do want to stress the fact that these folks are working as hard as they can to make sure that these programs get deployed effectively, efficiently as possible. And you know, it's not in any of our best interest for them to slow down the deployment of these funds. They're doing what they can, and hopefully we can find ways to keep businesses going until these monies hit the street and additional money comes to these programs. One thing that came through the CARES Act that I don't know if Nolan mentioned, there is and it was on the circle breakdown of where all the funds were allocated to the CARES Act. States received a certain amount of funding that is going to be going to them directly. States with larger local or larger population centers within them will be getting, actually, the money will flow down to local governments in Alaska. None of our cities actually reach the population threshold. So our understanding is about 1.25 billion of the overall funding for states is going to come to Alaska for the governor and his team to deploy. Treasury is supposed to be giving guidance on how that money can and should be used, I believe, this week. And hopefully the money will come soon. I know that there's been a lot of listening sessions with the governor's task force. Former Senator Begich, former Governor Parnell, and several others have been talking to stakeholder groups, businesses, economic development organizations, investors pretty regularly to try to get their feedback on what the best and most effective use of those funds would be. In addition to that, a lot of local governments and regional organizations are stepping up. I know that Juneau passed a loan program about a week or so ago to try and help businesses get through this. It's based off a similar program they deployed after a bit of a natural disaster they had there due to an avalanche. Several of the ARDers, the Alaska Regional Development Organizations, are deploying either microloan programs, expanding on what they've already got, or doing business development services. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the Small Business Development Center where I work. We've got offices in every major population center in the state, and we have been helping as many businesses as we can either identified financing, helping optimize your business model, your operations, helping with applications to SBA loan programs and traditional lending programs as well. And deciding which one is feasible, which one makes sense, or if any of them make sense, quite frankly. I mean, I don't think anybody wants to push folks into a mode of financing that is going to not be beneficial to them in the long term. Last but not least, I just wanted to talk a little bit about sort of what we see going forward and some of the things that are, I believe, going to be valuable to consider as we get through this. The CARES Act was really the sort of short-term Band-Aid. It was trying to stabilize an unstable situation economically in the short term. I mean, even with the size of the funding that was available, I mean, I don't think anybody that passed it thought, all right, now we're done, you know, we can all step back and problem solved. It was really just how do we get some breathing room so we can decide what's next, what comes next. And I think that is going to be the key in terms of the input that policymakers need right now. Not only how do we get through this current situation where people are on lockdown, there's a hunker down orders, things along those lines, but what does this look 6 months from now, 9 months from now, 12 months from now? I mean, Alaska in particular is going to have some issues with the impacts to the tourism industry, and that trickles down to local governments that rely on tourism-based taxes to fund their budgets. The oil price issue that's been going on, North Slope crude bouncing around above and below $20 a barrel, and the impacts that has on the state budget. Seasonal industries like tourism, like commercial fishing, things along those lines. What are going to be the long-term impacts, even if the lockdown or the quarantine orders ended this week? I mean, is that enough time for folks to really overcome what's happened? If not, what can we put in place now to help those businesses get through the next year? I think is where this conversation needs to sort of start leading. And lastly, I believe firmly that even though there are a lot of reasons to be frustrated and frightened and sort of confused about what's happening, the only way we make it through this is if we focus on trying to build each other up, trying to support the businesses that are out there, trying to find creative ways to get us through the next 6 months, and not focus so much on who to blame and how to sort of drag each other down. I mean, this is going to be a group effort. No one business, no one organization, no one pot of funding is going to be the silver bullet solution to any of this. It's going to take a team effort. And so far, and you can correct me if I'm wrong in the questions, I've seen a phenomenal upswelling of support for businesses and nonprofits, especially online. The Facebook groups that have popped up, the news articles, the number of businesses we see at the SBDC partnering up with each other to help each of them stay afloat, all of the ways that utility companies are forgiving people's payments or pushing them off. Banks are working with the people that already have loans out to help them structure their payments to be more forgiving and to get them through the short term. The way local governments and the state are pushing back on fees and inspections and all the other things that cumulatively, I believe, will help make the difference in turning the tide. And I believe that's all I've got from my presentation. I haven't checked the questions section yet, but hopefully we have a few that folks are interested in getting answered. And if you haven't added your questions in there yet, I highly encourage it. Let's take a look here. So it looks like, how do you think the closure of Canadian ports and the lack of cruise ships will affect small businesses after the travel restrictions are lifted? I'll take a shot at this, and then I'm sure Nolan has something as well. I believe that this is there's no way to sugarcoat it. I think this is going to be a rough season for tourism. I think that, like I said, even if the lockdown orders, the travel restrictions were ended today, it's going to be tough for folks to really get back into the swing of travel. It's going to be tough for them to get back into the mentality of I want to go to places. Plus, there's also going to be a financial issue. A lot of folks are out of work. I mean, Nolan mentioned the statewide numbers, but the national numbers are even more stark. I mean, it was millions and millions of people losing their jobs all within the same 2-week period in levels that I think haven't been seen since maybe the Great Depression. So I think it's a tough time for the tourism industry, but I'll let Nolan weigh in there if he's got a different opinion.
Yeah, what I would say, I think one of the important points is that it's not so much that the problem is Canada's closure of their ports for cruise ships as the broader fears about the virus itself. I think that Canada will probably ease up those restrictions when the threat is gone. I think even if they did earlier than that, I don't know if you'd see the cruise ships. I think cruises around the world have suffered horribly. Cruise companies have. I don't know that even if that ban weren't in place, I don't know that cruise ships would be coming. I don't know if it would be advisable for them to. The CDC and the federal government and the World Health Organization are all advising to stay off of cruises and those kinds of that activities that involve that level of crowding together. So the issue is more about whether the virus subsides and when it subsides than about any specific policy actions by Canada, in my opinion. It could be a different situation if the virus subsided and Canada still wasn't allowing them. That would be a bit different. But I think that tourism is really in a tough state right now, regardless of these kinds of actions. And I'm really afraid of what might be happening to our visitor industry, the effect of losing essentially a full season, which is really how those businesses make all of their year-round money.
Thank you, Nolan. It looks like we have another question here. I thought I saw that both new and existing SBA loans will be able to defer loan payments until January 2021. Sorry. If true, can you elaborate? Both loan programs, the EIDL and the PPP, both have payment deferral. For the economic injury disaster loan, it's up to 1 year, and for the payment protection, Paycheck protection program, it's 6 months. In both cases, though, interest will continue to accrue over that period. And with the PPP, ideally, what you're trying to do is expense it within the first 8 weeks of getting it. So hopefully, interest won't really be a factor there. Why were 501c6 organizations excluded from the loan programs? That I can't tell you. That was something that happened on the federal level, and the only thing I can think of is that in a lot of cases, these programs have certain organizational types that aren't generally eligible for a variety of reasons. I think that most of those concerns probably aren't as important now when everyone is hurting as much as they are. So one of the things that I know that Lori Wolf from the Foraker Group and others have proposed to the federal delegation when they asked for feedback was to expand the definition of nonprofits. I think Lori has told us that there was something like 27 different types of nonprofit organization structures for the nonprofit organizations. So there's quite a few different types that have been left out.
I can jump in and add a little bit more to that answer as well.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And I think I think John pretty accurately depicted is you can't really figure out the reason why 501c6s in particular are not included in the payroll protection plan, but they can apply for the EIDL. And one thing that I would say the federal delegation is being encouraged to do, but also the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has been lobbying very hard, especially as this fourth package is being structured, is that all 501c corporations be included. The way it's structured now, charitable organizations qualify, so the 501c3s, and also I believe it's 501c12, which are veteran-based organizations qualify, but there's a whole slew of others. And as Lori Wolf has reminded us, there's about 44,000 employees in the state of Alaska that work for a 501c type corporation. So it's definitely relevant and significant, and hopefully we'll see some progress in that area. Thanks.
Absolutely. Nolan, do you have anything you wanted to add to that particular point?
The only thing I would add is that I do know that some organizations are working on lobbying for C6 inclusion in some of the other loan programs, among others. C6s are important. That's a lot of business leagues, chambers of commerce, a lot of economic development organizations. So that is an important thing. I mean, I would definitely reiterate what Bruce mentioned. Our center did some of the work on the impacts of the nonprofit sector. 44,000 jobs, that's a correct number. They represent a very large share of Alaska's workforce. And in some communities, some regions of the state, as much as half of the employment is with nonprofits. So it is pretty critical not to overlook them.
Excellent. Let's see. Alaska's nonprofits were strongly supported by legalized gambling, which makes them ineligible for the EIDL. When this gambling support disappeared, some nonprofits were left without the ability to apply for an EIDL because of their gambling proceeds support history. Have you heard about any changes to this gambling support disqualifier in the next loan requirement iteration? So what they're talking about here is there is a provision in the restrictions on who is eligible for EIDL. If you receive more than 1/3 of your revenue from a gaming source, you're not eligible. Like I said, I wasn't involved in the creation of the criteria of this. I was done on the federal level. I don't actually believe that anybody involved at that level thought that this is what would happen. I believe this is more to prevent gambling establishments from accessing these loans. I do know that this is another issue that has been really pushed hard by the Forker Group and many, many others to get fixed. Some of the organizations that are ineligible, local organizations that are ineligible, you would be very familiar with. They are not small. They are not sort of a limited number. As to whether or not there's going to be changes in the next loan iteration, I sincerely hope so. I know that the federal delegation is aware of it. I know that the other SBDCs have kicked this up the food chain in their respective states as well. So hopefully, yes, there'll be a lot of changes, especially where it concerns nonprofits. Is it possible to apply for the $10,000 loan advance via EIDL without applying for the loan itself? Yes and no. The $10,000 loan, up to $10,000 loan advance, is part of the EIDL application. The good news is, you as long as you're eligible for it, you can get it whether or not you receive an EIDL loan. 2, if you are approved for an EIDL loan, there's nothing to say you have to accept it. So you do have to go through the process, but you don't actually have to incur any of the debt. That's not what you're interested in. This one's for Nolan. Nolan, your modeling of the disease spread and recovery shows no flattening of the curve. Why did you choose the JP Morgan model instead of the other models available which show the curve flattening?
So, I'm certainly not a public health expert, so I went with some of the best forecasting that I could find on that looked at the interplay between the public health situation and the economy, and so I found that example. The flattening of the curve, I mean, is kind of a relative thing. By and large, in this country, we have, I believe, flattened the curve overall. I think Alaska has flattened it probably to a much greater degree than most other places, which I think is a really good thing. Our closures went into effect earlier. Beyond that, though, the U.S. has not has had a pretty sharp increase in infections. It seems that overall our national reaction is a lot more in line with countries like Italy that have suffered pretty severely, and overall we didn't seem to have done enough to flatten the curve enough, and so that's why you see a large peak in that graph. And I believe that just reflects the best public health data that we have available at this time, and it is something that's alarming and concerning.
Regarding the PPP program, are electrical cooperatives or 501c12s, electrical cooperatives, and 501c6s associations eligible? My understanding is no, they are not. But Nolan, if you've got different information on that.
I don't, unfortunately, no.
I don't believe they're eligible. Will the names of businesses that apply for and get SBA loans be made public record? That's an interesting question. I don't actually know the answer to that. That's the first time that's come up. That's interesting. I will, let me see. I've got somebody's name associated with this. I will dig that up. I'll ask SBA and see if they know, and I will try and get back to you with that answer. That's a really great question. Let's see. Do you know what happened to the early applications on the SBA site for the EIDL loans? There was the online form that was fairly extensive that went out in the SBDC email, and then it was replaced by PDF forms with an upload to Box, and then was replaced by the current abbreviated online application. Yeah, so I do know some of this, and for those of you that filled out the initial forms, I can only apologize. Like I said, this is an unprecedented volume of applications and interest and outreach, and the SBA website and the SBA processes were just never meant or built to handle that. So my understanding is what happened is that the sheer number of people who were flooding the application system kind of crashed it, and they took the website offline for, I believe, a day or two, did some tweaking on the back end, and also changed the application criteria to the more streamlined version that it is today, and relaunched it. One of the things that the SBA are saying right now is if you did apply for the EIDL, I believe it's before March 30th, you should go back and do it again with a more streamlined application process. I know that's what no one wants to hear that, and again, I can only apologize, but I strongly recommend that if you haven't done so and you fall into that category, you should go back and do it one more time. The other thing that we've heard, and I don't know how real this is, but there is some anecdotal evidence online that if your application number starts with a 3, you're okay. If it doesn't, then you should go back and do it again. Again, that's what we're hearing is being told to folks who call into the SBA. I do not know that directly for a fact, so take it with a grain of salt. Nolan, did you have anything else you wanted to throw in?
I don't. I do know. I guess it's worth maybe saying something about with the EIDL that the program is probably going to cap loans at a certain size. Like I've heard a lot of reports about it's supposed to be on paper up to $2 million in lending to a business, but I'm hearing about much smaller amounts that are actually going to get approved, perhaps like 15,000 in lending, and I don't know if that's firm information or not, but I'm hearing that reported a lot of places.
So the SBA, and I've heard that too. I've seen the articles. The SBA, I reached out and asked them about that. They say that so far there's no official guidance that $15,000 is the limit. But you mentioned the numbers yourself. I mean, there's way more applications than there are dollars currently in the program. I suspect that if it does become automatic that you can't get anything more than 50,000, they'll release that information. But I've got to believe that they are banging on doors in Congress saying that they need to fund this program significantly higher in order to keep the money going. Because 15,000 is just not, I think, going to do what they're hoping to accomplish with this. Let's see. John, your programs talk about flexible and extended repayment terms. However, the folks I've talked to are being held to a 2-year repayment schedule. A short repayment schedule makes a business have a very aggressive expansion from pre-shutdown position in order to pay back the loan. How is the repayment schedule calculated? All right. So before we get into that question, I need to make sure folks understand the distinction. I am with the SBDC. I have no money to loan or give or any such thing. I have no ability to impact this process beyond what my organization does, which is we are business development professionals. We help businesses start, grow, even exit. In this case, because we are partially funded by the SBA, we know a little bit more about these programs than the average bear, but they are by no means my programs. They are the SBA's program. The 2-year repayment schedule is particular to the PPP program. The EIDL is up to a 30-year repayment schedule. And ideally, the program was built so that you would spend that money within the 2 months after you receive it, so that it can be spent on payroll and things along those lines. The one thing I will tell you, and this is advice that anyone interested in this program should really take to heart, make sure that you are able to staff up. If you've let your people go, make sure they're willing to come back. And if you still have them, make sure they're willing to stay on before you commit to this if that 2-year repayment is a problem. Again, at the end of the day, it's a 1% loan spread out over 2 years. If you don't get any of that, and it's only up to 250% of a 1 month's average payroll, but if you're not able to get any of that money spent on the qualifying expenses, it may not be a good fit for you, honestly. So that's something you want to take into account. But ideally, if you take this money, it's because you think the bulk of it is going to be expended in 8 weeks and forgiven. Let's see, we've been, let's see, great to hear. Sorry. In my question about payment deferral, I was asking about the normal small business loans, not the PPP or the disaster loans. What's the window for getting that deferral? I'm not sure. The deferrals that we know about are through the PPP and the EIDL. If there's other programs, if you want to send me the details on which programs in specific you're asking about, happy to look into that for you. John, can home office, no employee type small business qualify for the PPP, and how? You're going to want to reach out. The answer is yes and no. So you're going to want to reach out to an SBDC advisor or the SBA or somebody else that can look over who you are and what you do. But broadly speaking, yes. As of Friday, you should be eligible. They have different ways of calculating the maximum amount of the loan you can get that isn't reliant on payroll necessarily, but it's a little more complicated, and because they just released it, there is a little bit of confusion on how that's done. So I would highly recommend reaching out to them or to your lender. If you have an existing relationship with a lender that is providing PPP loans, then them as well, because I think each one is handling it slightly differently in terms of the application process, not the implementation. And it looks like we've got time for maybe one more. I'm filling out the COVID-19 telehealth application right now. Any insight on this program? I'm a pediatrician in private practice. You know, I don't have a lot of information on that, but just off the top of my head, but what I can tell you is that if you reach out to our offices, we will find out, or I probably have somebody on staff that does know, and if there's anything else we can learn about it or anything we do to help you, I'm happy to do it. That was actually a little faster than I thought. So if you receive a PPP loan, are you still able to get an EIDL loan later? The good news is yes. And if it fits your business's capacities and eligibilities, I highly recommend you to go for both. The PPP, like I said, is meant to be deployed within 8 weeks. You can stretch it to 2 years, but it's meant to be deployed within 8 weeks after receipt. The EIDL is a longer term loan that is spread out over 30 years, theoretically. The caveat here is that you can't use both pots of funds on the same thing to get the PPP forgiven, if that makes any sense. So you have to make sure that you're using PPP funds on qualified PPP expenses over the 8 weeks after you receive it in order to get the full forgiveness, and then bring EIDL to bear. The other caveat there is if you do receive that loan advance, the up to $10,000 loan advance, that forgiven amount comes out of your PPP loan forgiveness as well. Sorry, Nolan, I kind of dominated the Q&A here. It looks like that is all of the questions. We made it through the whole list. That's fantastic. Bruce, did you want to do any?
I'll do a wrap up here for you.
Yeah, great.
For the forum. I mean, first and foremost, thank you so much, John and Nolan, for your time. You folks navigated our first virtual Make It Monday forum very well, provided great information for our business members. And, you know, folks, these two guys and their staff do a lot of good work for small business. And, you know, you can see why we rely on them for good information and for action. And, you know, a lot of the information we have on our website some of it does link back to SBDC and to Nolan's organization as well. One thing I was going to mention, and both of you talked about it, this may be a question that's just getting a little bit more angst and anxiety in the community. So when can we start it? When can we go back? You know, what are the trigger points? And And there isn't a real finite plan, but there are a number of plans that have consistent components. And so we just posted a letter on our website on the coronavirus update page on the Anchorage Chamber website that talks about, you know, what does a national return to work plan look like? And though it's not finite, it's more or less general areas. It does talk about, you know, certain things like public transportation, what needs to be in place, protection for employees when they come back, you know, ample testing in the workplace, all of these things that you may not think about right off the top. So it's actually a pretty good read, and it kind of helps people understand, well, these are really the steps that need to be in place before we can safely get back to work. And it's going to be a phased-in approach. I think that's what both of you mentioned. It's not going to be, you know, 0 to 60 in, you know, 5 seconds. It's going to be phased in over time, but it's a pretty good read put together by the U.S. Chamber. And I also want to thank my staff again. John, you're very gracious in thanking them for the work they do in providing information. We've lost track, as everyone has, of the 5-day work week. Now we just work as it's needed, but they're constantly updating the information on our website and through eNews. And I think that's really all that I have, other than just a sincere thank you to you, gentlemen. Thank you so much for coming in and educating our membership. We had about 105 participants today. So anyway, thank you again, folks. Thanks for making time to participate, and we will be in touch. Take care. Have a good week.
Thank you.
Bruce.